Stella, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I am excited to dive into your angel investing journey. There's a lot to go through here. I think it'll be really useful for people. To start with, how did you even begin angel investing in the first place?
Well, I have always been really passionate and involved in the startup world, whether it's being a founder or an employee or working in VC. And so, actually, the very first startup or the very first angel investment I made was into a startup that was run by my old boss at Sean, who I worked with at Fee Fighters, and he
Yep.
was launching a tech-enabled insurance company, and we're sitting in a coffee shop, and he was telling me all about it, and I was like, I'm in. Like he's such a smart guy, and I had so much respect from working with him. I would have wanted to be involved in anything that he did. And so, even though I didn't really have a ton of capital, I committed to investing, and it's been that was the first one that I did, and they announced their plans to go public earlier this year. So it was really
Oh my
validating.
goodness.
Yeah. Well, and then the second check that I wrote, which was thankfully a much smaller check, was into a company that no longer exists. So I feel like the first two investments that I made were sort of like, the extreme positive and the extreme negative. But I feel like angel investing gave me an opportunity to be involved and to help and to feel part of a lot of different startups, and not just the one that I was currently working on. So that was in 2000, I think 16. I also invested as a limited partner in a number of different venture capital funds. I find that's a really great way of getting your feet wet, because doing direct angel investments takes a lot of time. And I don't know how operators, especially who are in like executive or leadership positions, how they do it. But that's a really great way of doing it as well. And a lot of funds will let strategic investors, like operators, come in at a smaller check size than institutional LPs. So I think that's something that many folks don't realize.
Okay, there's a lot with that I want to unpack, but first I want to go back to the first investment. So the first investment, at that time, did you know you were ready to start investing into startups? Were you like, okay, like I'm at a point where I want to? Because a lot of times you hear that, companies mention they're raising, and if you're not investing in companies or you haven't done it before, you're like, okay, that's cool, and you just move on. But like for you, how'd that go?
Well, I'd sort of gotten a taste of what the startup life cycle could be, because at that point, so the first startup that I did was Fee Fighters with Sean, that got acquired by Groupon. So, I sort of had that taste of what an early investor, the sort of the return that they could have. And I don't think that Sean was raising at that time, but I said to him, like, when you raise your friends and family round, like, let me know. I'll write a check. And then I came home to my husband, and I was like, we're writing a check into Sean's company. And he was like, with what money? Um, I think I've been fortunate. Trello was acquired where I was an executive by Atlassian. And so I have capital to invest in other companies from that liquidity event. So it's an exciting time. I've invested in about 27 companies to date, and I have no plans to stop.
I love it. That's a lot. I want to go through that too. So with those investments, going from that first investment, did you know a certain number of investments you want to make per year? You're kind of just opportunistic, being available and open. Like how'd that progress? Because I'm always thinking of other investors who are one trying to get started in the first place, and then two thinking about a portfolio or what that looks like. How did you think through that, Stella?
I did not. I was really fucking busy. I mean, we were building a startup. And so I think, I, after that point, we wrote that check. And then a few months later, a business school friend of mine, Ezra Galston, was raising his first venture capital fund. And I was like, we have to write a check into that. And my husband was like, with what money? And then, so we did that. And then, for a few years, like I had a baby, and the Atlassian acquisition happened. I really sort of fell off the radar, and I just didn't have the capacity or the bandwidth to start doing it. And then just maybe like a year and a half ago, when thing, the pandemic started happening, and I don't know, I was sort of in the mindset that I knew I was going to be leaving Atlassian soon, and I was like, well, I'm going to open the door and start meeting people. And I realized, like, hey, I have the capacity to start writing checks. So um, I wrote a lot of checks into venture funds in the last few years. I'm an advisor to a few funds, and I started networking. And there's lots of different ways to do angel investing. As I mentioned, there's being an LP in a venture fund. There's also SPVs, or special purpose vehicles, that you can invest into, that where someone is sourcing a deal, and Vitalize does a lot of that. And in the last, I think, year and a half, AngelList launched the syndicates, which makes it really easy to invest alongside smart people that get allocations from companies. And then there's also like the direct cap table investing, which I've been trying to do more myself, because I want to be able to help companies, and I want to be able to
Yep.
be more of a strategic angel along that journey. The thing about that is that it does take a lot of time and energy, and people and a lot of it is very organic. So people need to know that you're writing checks, that here's your skill set, here are the areas that you're interested in investing. And sometimes it's helpful to write a thesis, just like a firm would write, because you can end up getting a lot of opportunities and being pulled in lots of different directions. So I've definitely found that having a thesis helps me be more focused in my investing journey.
Well, for you then, what does that look like? What does that entail? And has that evolved your thesis over time? I'm curious.
Well, once I started to be more systematic about angel investing, I sort of sat down and said, okay, number one, where can I add value? And I think, given my experience, I think a lot about the future of work, collaboration, B2B SaaS, product led growth. So, all of those things are areas that I've experienced myself. I've advised companies, etc. So I'm very keen to invest in those areas. I think I have kind of an unfair advantage, as they say. Um, then I was thinking about one thing that I'm super passionate about is remote work. Trello was remotely distributed since 2014. And right before the pandemic, I was writing and traveling around the world, speaking about how the future was going to be remote work. And everyone sort of laughed at me. And then the pandemic happened. So I think that an area that I'm very excited about, because there's much more mainstream opportunity and adoption now, are tools and services that enable mass remote work at scale. So that's an area that I really enjoy investing in. And then I think that there's like a third category, maybe third and fourth category, where it's like, if it's an amazing founder, someone that I've worked with before, someone that I really believe in what they're doing, like, I'm going to write the check, because I call that bucket like the opportunistic bucket. And and I do end up making some investments out of there, because I don't think there has to be flexibility. And then maybe the fourth bucket for me is learning. So I started out not investing in anything consumer related, because I don't have any consumer experience. But what I've learned is, like, angel investing is a way to learn about different industries, and a lot of things that I've done in B2B SaaS can be applied in other areas. So I've written some checks in areas like healthcare and or health tech, let's say, and direct to consumer products, where literally my whole goal is, obviously, like, I hope that it'll be a great investment, but also just to get
Yeah.
exposure to a different vertical that I don't know about.
Yeah, that's helpful to hear that side of things and how you kind of look at things. I'm curious for you, how do you get that conviction around writing a check? Because we have a lot of new investors in the Vitalize Angels group, and there's a lot of new investors out there, because they're seeing these different ways of getting into startup investing, whether it be through crowdfunding, other things. Like, people are starting to get into this, they're hearing more about it. Like, for you, what gave you the conviction, or gives you the conviction now, to like actually pull the trigger on an investment to do that? Like, what is it about it for you?
Well, just as a category in general, angel investing.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I have seen from my own career in life how angel investing enables wealth creation through the angel investors that have invested in my startups. So I think it's a pretty natural thing as an operator to want to do that yourself. I think you also have to think like I'm not a public market investor. I can't make myself care about looking at EBITDA and like even though I have an MBA, but like I my unfair advantage is early stage technology. So that's where I think that I can, that I can have an impact. And then I think like what I would do is I think about it sort of systematically. Like I set aside some number where I'm like, okay, this is how much I'm going to invest into early stage tech. And then I think about it by stage too. Like this is how much I'm going to invest pre-seed, seed, maybe some Series A, and then I've invested like once or twice in a Series B. Um, but so I think about it that way. And I think the other thing is there is some pattern recognition. I should say I did intern at a VC firm when I was in business school, so I had some exposure to how this is done institutionally. But I think that once you start seeing deals, once you start talking to founders, once you start helping and seeing like where you add value, I think you develop a feel for when you see something that's really worthwhile versus something where you don't. And I think for me, the very hardest thing, because I've been a founder, is saying no to other founders. Because I mean, if it were
Yeah.
up to me, I would invest in everything, but that's just not how the game works.
Yeah, that's unfortunately, yeah, not how the game works. You can't. You see so many great, great companies all the time. Especially being at, Vitalize, we see tons. I know Gail mentioned on Twitter recently, like 25 or so people are pitching her a day. Like that's just her. Then Caroline, that team gets people pitched. I get people pitched to me. It's like it's wild the volume, and especially if you're doing a job, if you have a presence on, so like you're gonna get a lot of good deals. You can't invest in all of them, unfortunately. And one of the things too I wanted to talk about, I saw you from your Twitter, is like I think you mentioned a thing around like gender disparity between sharing deals, women sharing deals versus men sharing deals, and like dynamics of that. Like, take me through more of that and how you see deal sourcing and sharing deals and that more
Well,
broadly.
it's a very opaque process, sourcing deals. It's a lot of like old school networking. And I definitely noticed once I started actively angel investing that the men who I knew who are all angel investing were like texting each other and would be totally okay with it. And having it be very informal, like having these deal conversations transactionally in addition to whatever social thing they were doing. And I find that women are much more like, ooh, I don't want to like bug this person and I find myself thinking that too, like, ooh, I don't want to like, or like, am I qualified to invest in this thing? Or maybe I'm not going to add value. And, you know, and it sucks. And I think that there are a number of people who have recognized this and are doing things to help, both from a like organizational and also informally. So informally, like I've started a group of women angel investors in Chicago where we're trying to share deals with each other. I'm also part of a couple other ones, one that's based in New York, and then one that's based in the Bay Area, where it's like women and or people of color, or people who don't have the advantage of like being in these um, investor networks that are like the traditional VCs. So as an angel investor in general, you're trying to have multiple sources of deal flow, and I have found those to be really, really great. The other thing I'll say is I'm definitely noticing a trend where founders who care about having diverse cap tables will put aside an allocation for strategic women or people of color, whatever, to diversify their cap tables. And I love that. I'm like, I will happily write a check into an oversubscribed deal of a company that I love.
Yes.
I think it's also great signaling because a lot of the founders who do that, are building cultures that are inclusive and are places where people want to work, which is important in such a like crazy job market that we have today. So, there's a lot of work to be done. Um, and there's a lot of people who are doing the work. So that's at least good.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it's something where it's like it's not only like the right thing to do, it just also makes business sense. Like, diverse teams outperform. So it's like, why would you not want to have that in every aspect of you both building your company and your investors in your company? And that's something, yeah, we get pretty amped up about at Vitalize as well in terms of what we're doing.
I totally agree. It's like whenever I see a deck and it's like all, like all white dudes, it's such a turn off for me because it's also like, do they not have the self-awareness to, to think about the better outcomes and things like that. So I think it's a nice sign of how the world is changing. When I did work in VC, like was it 8 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, at this point it was a very different it was not like the environment today where people care about these things. Like, so for me, I find it very refreshing.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to go back to, you mentioned earlier, and I saw you post on Twitter as well. I try to do my research here, is with the whole idea of being an operator, a founder, whatever, and then also angel investing and the time for that. I mean, how did you balance that while you're at Trello at Atlassian? Same thing. Like, how did you balance that with angel investing and wanting to help these companies you invest in? Like, take me through how that went for you. I know it wasn't necessarily perfect, but I'm curious for other people who are listening, how you manage that.
Not well. I think I would do it very differently this time around. But I basically just made my first couple of investments and then didn't really do much. And then I started doing a little bit of the LP investing, which is much more hands off. And then it was only when I made sort of the conscious decision that, like, hey, I know I'm leaving Atlassian soon. Like, this is something that I'm interested in doing, that I really started to network and talk to people and source deals and build up, these sources of deal flow. So I don't know how. That's like I would ask other operators. I don't know how you find time to do this because like I was leading a fairly large team. I have a family. I'm trying to balance all of these things that everybody's trying to balance, and unfortunately, it wasn't really until I said like this is an important thing I'm going to start focusing on that I actually did it.
Yeah. And for you too, with that experience you have with that marketing experience for many years in marketing at a large company, I mean, how does that work typically when you're working with founders? I'm sure it's always different case by case basis, but are they asking you a lot for help on the marketing side? Are you like, hey, I have these skills, I can help with X, Y, Z? Like, how's that gone for you, Stella?
I think the value that I can really provide now is much more strategic. And I think that's what you want when you're a founder because, you want people to bring their experience and their lens and the pattern recognition that comes from so many years of building a team. So the things that I really can help with are early go-to-market strategy, hiring, like what should my first marketing hire look like? Should I hire a VP of marketing? Should I hire someone more junior? How do I build out the team? When should we start thinking about marketing? What should the, go to market motion look like? How do marketing and sales work together? How do product and marketing work together? So all these things like, and I think the interesting thing too is that, I have my operator set of experiences and now I have kind of some advisory and investing set of experiences where I can pull from like, hey, this company did it this way, and this is how it worked out for them. So it becomes a much more like portfolio approach to giving advice. So, but yeah, I think it's interesting that most startups will have the same like handful of questions. So yeah, and I'm always happy to answer.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to have, like, think about investors always. It's not necessarily they have deep expertise on everything, but it's going to be this broader, like kind of more shallow expertise. But for a founder's perspective, like that's really useful, at least to get you going and start and like maybe headed in the right direction. I think that's a really useful aspect of, talking to your investors and getting that perspective. And to your point, also like who you bring on your cap table based on that expertise they may have. And, have they've seen a lot of deals in whatever sector, or they, if they have deep domain expertise or they have that deep marketing expertise, like you mentioned as well. And so always just talking to founders, like thinking through that when you're thinking of who's on your cap table, you have this opportunity with equity to bring in all these interesting people to help you grow your company, and like to really think about that deeply.
And I find that founders want, there's sort of like the professional investors that they bring in, and there's a certain set of expectations that comes with that. But when they're bringing in and they're thinking about their cap table construction, they want someone who has product experience, or, industry experience or marketing. So I think from branding yourself as an angel investor, there's an important question to ask of like, what value do I bring? Because you don't want to just be writing a check. You want to have that relationship. You want to help the business. Like, you know, the first of the month, usually I get a whole influx of company updates, and I always read. I mean, you read everything, and then I go down to the how you can help section, and I try to do something every month if I can for the companies. And that'll be things like sourcing candidates for executive roles, or sharing something on social media, or if they a lot of right now, since hiring is such an issue, like it is a lot of taking advantage of the awesome people that I have in my network, and not just marketing. Like there was one a few weeks ago that I ended up sourcing a couple of like VP of people candidates for them, and they were very happy. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear that. I mean, there's so many ways you can add value as an angel, and I've heard from different people I've talked to as well. And some people, you look at on Twitter. If you're on Twitter at all, you see some people who have massive audiences getting access to all of these companies because they obviously have distribution, which then plays a role in a lot of consumer companies. You look at Packy McCormick, you look at Lenny's newsletter, you look at a lot of different people out there, different sources out there who have that value add, and they can get access to deals because they're someone that strategically they want in their cap table. So like, as an angel, you got to think through what your advantage is, like you mentioned. And I think interesting thing too, you mentioned about being an LP. Take me through that side of things, how you think through being an LP, because I had this discussion not long ago with another lady who mentioned, to really get venture dollars flowing to diverse mix of people, it starts at the top. And if you have more women LPs, people of color LPs, like that flows down. Like, how did you get started with that?
That is so true, because what ends up happening is that the deals are reflective of the network of the partner at the venture capital firm, and their perspective. So I think that the best thing to do is it's not just gender diversity, it's industry diversity, it's all the different kinds of diversity. Like that's really what you should be aiming for. So I have written checks as an LP to female-led funds, in debut funds too, because women who are sort of going off on their own and after having institutional experience, I love writing those checks because I know that those women are going to work really hard and that the odds are against them. So I think right now I'm not focused on writing more LP checks because you have a different kind of a return profile when you're investing in a venture fund, and I'm sort of more interested in direct cap table investing these days. But I still think it's very important. And the other one of the trends that I'm seeing is that there are a lot of angel investors who are now going off and raising their own funds or starting their own syndicates to share pro rata rights with people who are interested. So that's another way to contribute and get involved.
I know we're almost out of time here. One last question I'm curious about is just any other trends or things in future of work you're excited about, interested in, just anything else there. I'd love to hear about.
Well, I'm very interested in things that enable remote work. So, right now there's a lot of pain with things like organizing offsites, or knowing when people are working and when people are not working. And, sitting in Zoom all day is what we're doing today, but that's not going to be what we're doing, 2, 3 years from now. There's going to be a whole slew of new ways of working and new tools and asynchronous work. And I'm just really interested in learning and seeing what those are. It's really challenging to get people to try new things and for those things to stick. So I think that's the real opportunity, and the question is like, what's gonna be the next Slack, or what's gonna be the next Zoom, and I think about that a lot.
Stella, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you if they would like to?
You can follow me or DM me on Twitter. It's just at Startup Stella.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today, Stella.
Yeah, thank you so much.